I'm trapped. I'm trapped behind this desk. I can't go to the right or the left because there's a screen. Can't move the computer because then the VGA doesn't work. And if I stand there, then I can't see my slides. So I have to stand here behind my little desk and proclaim to you like a preacher. So apologies, it's just the way it is. The room is set up that way and I'm constrained.
The users requested it like that. The users requested it to be set up like that.
The users requested it, did they? Did they now?
So
one of them did, probably in a forum, and everybody believed it. Okay.
Call it immobile UX.
What? Immobile UX, exactly. This is the most non-mobile talk I've ever done like that. Okay, so anyway, here's some slides, and here's me standing very still telling you about them. I did the maths, and I reckon that's what it's going to be. Maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. 2.25 million smartphones a day, 207.7 million smartphones in quarter 4 2012. They're probably going up. The great thing about this space is that there's so many stats, yeah, and these big, big numbers, and you can say, oh, and I found another stat, and I found another stat, and you'll kind of see it's like, okay, enough with the graphs, Phil, as we go on. There's a lot of those going on. So there's a lot of this stuff going on. Gartner famously said a couple of years ago that by 2013 there would be 1.82 billion browser-equipped enhanced phones and 1.78 billion PCs, and this is the year when it happens, and it might have already happened, and nobody really knows, but it probably has. That there's more internet devices that are phones than are PCs at this point, which means that mobile is without doubt really, really important. And if you didn't know that, I'd be quite surprised. And there's some kind of weird stuff going on out there, and this was my favorite. I bet some of you saw this, yeah? So Tesco in Korea needed more shops. They're the second biggest supermarket in Korea, and they needed more shops, but they didn't want to pay for real estate, so they put up posters in the subway where all of their goods that you can buy from Tesco are there, and each one's got a QR code, and while you're waiting for the train, you can snap the QR codes to place your order, and by the time you get home, a little Korean man comes to deliver your order so that you didn't have to carry it home on the train or do anything like that. And it's been very successful, and Tesco are thrilled to bits. But that is like the weirdest mobile application I've ever seen, and it's been a huge hit, and stuff is changing like this all the time, and mobile can do that. So mobile is, you know, it's disruptive, it's interesting, it's not just there's a lot of it, which is important, there's like intriguing stuff going on as well. And I've been trying to do talks about this for a while now, and I concluded that it's like the Wild West, yeah? The rules keep changing and there's lots of fights. So it's perfectly possible that people will end up throwing balls of paper at each other and stuff before this session's out, because everybody's got their own view and their own set of holy grails and their own set of beliefs, and no, you do it this way, no, you do it that way, and there's lots of fascinating squabbles and so on. So I'm finding that the mobile space actually reminds me quite a lot of that, and I don't know if anybody was around for that, yeah, but this kind of, the round 1 or 2 of the browser wars, yeah, that there's lots of stuff happening, lots of people going in different directions, you've got to place your bets somewhere, and who knows whether you're placing them in the right place. Okay, but I've got for you just 2 pieces of the large puzzle that I want to talk about today. One is your boss wants an iPhone app, and the other one is the trunk test does not apply. Both of these will make a bit more sense, I hope, when we get into them. So, number 1, your boss wants an iPhone app. Your boss wants an iPhone app. And it keeps happening. I wonder how many of you it's happened to too, but I keep ending up in these consulting situations where somebody says the boss wants an iPhone app, and they look slightly kind of nervous and not sure that it was really a good idea, and slightly desperate, but it's like, no, the boss wants an iPhone app. And the question is always, well, why does the boss want an iPhone app? And, you know, there's some good answers. Oh, no, one of those graphs, yeah? Because the iPhone has grown faster than anything ever, yeah? So this pink line here, according to Morgan Stanley, is the growth of AOL, and the yellow line is the growth of iMode, and the pale blue line is the growth of, I don't know what the heck it is, mobile internet. No, Netscape, there we go. And the green line is the growth of iPhone and iPod Touch. So it's like, I went to a conference and I saw this stuff is growing, and if it's growing, we need to be riding that wave, which is actually a good point, you know, that's a good way to grow. To ride waves of technology is a good way to grow. So he's seen that. And he's probably seen that it's just getting started, yeah, that in general mobile device sales are going completely ballistic, and we're only here, and there's all of this still to go. And so, you know, this is a growing market. The wave is still out there to be ridden. That's great. And he probably has an iPhone, and I couldn't really get the stats to prove it, but this is very important, isn't it? So this stat that I got shows the distribution of income levels across iPhone versus Android. So what you can see is that it appears that there's a whole load of really rich iPhone users, whereas Android users seem to crest kind of more in the middle. And you can guess why if you know the Android range is much broader and there's a whole load of stuff. But probably if your boss is rich, well, maybe that makes him more likely to have an iPhone. Maybe it doesn't really, but you know what I'm saying? They all have iPhones. And he sees that everyone else has got an app already. And this is great, because it means this is clearly not a risk. Yeah? If you want to, since everybody else has got one, then clearly making an app is not a risky thing to do, or even a difficult thing to do, because there's all of these apps, there's 775,000 of them. So, you know, we just need to get one of those, because everyone else has got one, and why would you not? And if he's really smart, he may have noticed that apps are addictive in a whole load of ways. So this graph is showing how much time is used on apps, on mobile devices, versus on the mobile web, on mobile devices, according to BI Intelligence Nielsen. So there's something very important here, yeah? That people are spending a lot more time on apps than they are on the mobile web. So you may well have noticed that, because you kind of instinctively notice that. And there's lots of reasons, but there's a set of reasons which I'm finding quite interesting, which is that there's sort of psychological reasons why apps are really appealing. And if you've ever read any Dan Ariely, or you've followed any of the kind of persuasive design stuff, you might recognize some of these cognitive biases, things that humans do without knowing them. Sometimes they're not actually that helpful, but they do them anyway. So one of the problems we've got as human beings is that we habituate to stuff. We get used to stuff, and then we get bored of it. And the App Store offers lots of lovely novelty in neat, lovely, tidy packages which you can browse through ever so conveniently and say, oh, I want that bit of candy, please. Which is a really nicely arranged thing for dealing with this habituation problem. And it's actually just like fashion. The reason the fashion industry every year launches a new collection, this winter's collection, is not because we need to dress differently every winter. It's because if we're bored of last winter's stuff, they can sell some more stuff by making interesting new stuff. So there's some of that going on in the App Store, that it's this beautiful shopping mall full of novelty, and actually we get bored and we want the novelty, so it's very good at that. Then there's this fascinating business of what it's like to be somebody searching for stuff or finding stuff, which is what goes on in your brain when you find something that you like, or when you're just on the brink of finding it. You get a dopamine hit, which makes you feel really good. And that's what this pigeon is getting in something called a Skinner box, which was developed in the 1950s to experiment how you get pigeons to become obsessive at pecking buttons. And the answer is, you give them rewards randomly. Sometimes they press the button and something good happens, sometimes they press the button and it doesn't. And app stores are quite a lot like that, that you might download an app, no, that one wasn't there. Next one, oh, that was really good, And this idea of, whoa, that was great, there's actually some addictiveness in that, so that's very interesting. So yeah, I hope that's resonating. Owning an app makes you like it more. So there's this thing called the endowment effect, which is that if you own stuff, it's fairly well proven fact in a number of experiments that you start to rate it more highly than when you first got it. So if I own an app, there's a chance that if it's halfway decent, I'll come to adore that app and I want to hoard it. So you end up with this situation where you're hoarding apps, and there are probably apps on your home screen which you haven't actually used for quite a long time now, but you're not quite ready to delete it yet because you might. And so you end up with app hoarding. And app hoarding, fine, it happens, so not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean also that the managing director knows, or your boss knows, that if he can get an app onto your home screen, then he's got a little tiny bit of his brand that sticks you in the eye every time you go past, and provided the app isn't too dreadful, you won't delete it, you'll hang on to it, and there it will be, his little brand sitting there shouting at you every time you go past. So those are some motivations that I think are in play, and I think that probably those are hard to articulate. I think if you go to most bosses who want iPhone apps and you say, why do you want one? They'll be like, well, you know, because I want one. And I think some of these things are at play, that people are finding iPhone apps, and he's done it, and he knows this thing feels like, you know, people are discovering apps, and you get these little bits of candy, and it feels good, and everybody's got one, and all those factors are at play. He probably hasn't noticed, depending on which particular boss we're talking about, that Android is outselling iPhone. So the green is the Android and the yellow is the iPhone. The graph is from my broadband and yada yada yada. That Android sells shedload more than iPhone and has been doing so since 2010, I think, because they have got lots of models and lots of cheaper models, and Samsung's marketing budget is gigantic and things like that. So the iPhone app, well, yes, okay, but what about the other one? And then he also possibly hasn't noticed that BlackBerry's outselling them both by a mile. So this is Vodacom's figures from August. That's about 2.4 million BlackBerries on Vodacom. And you can see that that's the other bit is Android and iPhone. So we know in South Africa that BlackBerry is phenomenal. So his desire to make an iPhone app, well, maybe that's okay if you want to target other bosses and high net worth individuals. But if you want to reach the masses, then iPhone might not be a terribly wise move. And then, of course, there's the eternal problem of like, well, if everybody's got one, and this is a low-risk thing to do because everybody's already done it, well, then everybody's already done it. So then what exactly are you bringing to the party? Because everybody's already done it. So you're new and different, and you're going to leapfrog, and you're going to zag when everybody else zigs, and you're just going to make another one. And then how are you going to get found when there are 775,000 of these things there? So what it kind of means is that actually I want an iPhone app really means I want an app for multiple platforms that has to be useful and easy and delightful on each one so that it can get found and voted up in the app stores and so on. And we're going to have to continually update it because updates will get you lifted up in the app stores as well. And anyway, this is a moving target. And you're going to have to run additional marketing campaigns to get people to know that the app even exists. And this is not just a, I want an iPhone app, this is a, I want a whole mobile phenomenon here, which can get pretty expensive. So what's going on in that space? Well, this is just a drop in the ocean, really. Yeah? So one of the things that is happening is that some of the major apps that we might all recognize, like Foursquare, are trying to converge their designs to make them as non-different as possible between the different operating systems. So if you're making an Android app, you want it to feel Android-y. If you're making an iPhone app, you want it to feel iPhone-y. But if we can manage to get iPhone-iness and Android-iness to be very close together, well, that means we don't have to design everything twice or 3 times or whatever. And so they've done a superb job on Foursquare in a whole load of ways. But you can see here we've got the Android one and the iPhone one. And the biggest difference between the two is that Android puts its nav bars up there and iPhone puts its nav bars down there. And Android, if you read the guidelines from Google, they're like, make sure you put them up here, eh? Other operating systems that we won't name, put them down here. We put ours up here. And if you look at Instagram, you'll see very much the same thing, that it's very, very similar across the two, and Facebook, so on and so forth. Okay, so there are probably other things you can do, like you could try using PhoneGap and all that stuff, and a lot of you guys and girls know a hell of a lot more about it than I do, so I'm not really going to tackle that much. The $1 million question that I am interested in is, does his idea make sense as an app anyway? So I was walking through a shopping centre 3 weeks ago, and I saw a little table next to an Opel Astra or something. On it was this display board, and it said, get the new Thorpe app. And Thorpe is a car dealership. They sell Opels. And you can see GM Thorpe, you can see it in the background there. Get the new Thorpe app. And I thought, this is so ludicrous, I have to take a photo of this. So I did, and that's why it's slightly blurry, because I was kind of walking past the top. How many people have downloaded the new Thorpe app? Okay. Tell us what it's like. If you just get it down, and then you can give us a little critique of it afterwards. Because it doesn't make sense to make a car dealership into an app. There's something wrong there, isn't there? So this boss said, I want an iPhone app. And he was smart enough to say, and I want a BlackBerry app. But he wasn't smart enough to say, but my business doesn't make sense as an app. And there's something funny going on there. Telcom. This is the Telcom Android tablet app. And this little quote from News 24. Telcom recently unveiled its app on the Apple App Store, but there have only been about 2,500 downloads in the 2 weeks since launch. What's the point? Wrote a user named PierreQ77. What's the point? Hands up, who's downloaded the Telcom app? Okay. You could have, you know. So why not? There's something not right. And if your boss says he needs an app, and this is the situation you're in, what's going on? So perhaps a responsive website is all that you need. And this is a big puzzle for me, but I think I've got most of the pieces squared away. So going back, this is another version of that graph that one of the many graphs I showed you earlier. Time spent on iOS and Android connected devices. Apps, 80%, browser, 20%. So we've got this situation which this browser, 20%, is actually 31 minutes per day for the average American. So they spend a lot of time on their mobile devices here. So what we're saying here is that most of the time, people spend, 80% of the time, they spend using apps. So surely a responsive website is a bad idea, because that means that all of that blue stuff I don't get access to because I'm not in the App Store. So problem. But I suppose if you look at what they're doing with those apps, we've got games 32%, Facebook 18%, entertainment 8%, utility, which would be things like email, maps 8%, social networking 6%, news 2%, productivity 2%, other 6%. So maybe looking at new and used cars falls into the other 6%, I don't know. But it sure isn't a game, nor is it Facebook, nor is it entertainment, nor is it maps and email, nor is it social networking or news or productivity. So the things people are using apps for are not the Thorpe app thing or the Telcom app thing. They're using them for stuff that they do a lot. And so some guys who decided, this doesn't actually make sense is the Financial Times. So this is not an app. This is a website. It's app.ft.com, and in fact, if you scroll up a tiny bit, you'd see the browser header. Or you can always save it onto your desktop on an Apple device and then load it without the browser Chrome at the top. And they basically said, no, we're getting out of the apps game. This doesn't make sense for us, because if somebody sees one of these articles and tweets it, and somebody clicks on the tweet to come through, we don't want to say, oh, well done for clicking on the tweet, please download our app. We want to say, cool, boom, you're in the app. You're engaged, you're playing. And we reckon that with HTML5, we can do everything we need to do for our news website. And we don't need no stinking apps. And then this one was very interesting, which is US mobile shoppers prefer the responsive web. So the top 5 retail mobile sites are Amazon, Best Buy, eBay, Target, and Walmart in the States. And what you can see is that the number of those that were reached by app, 24% of users reached them by app, 45% of users reached them by responsive HTML web thing instead. So I would have thought, oh yeah, the Amazon app, the eBay app, that would make sense. But actually no, these guys are seeing more traffic coming through on web than they are on app. So what's going on? Well, you've probably worked it out, because it's not actually that hard when you really stop and think about it. It depends what your users are trying to do with the particular kind of information that you offer. So we've got frequency of use as being something pretty important. If something gets used several times a day, like email, then an app might be a good idea. And if something is very rarely used, like checking to see whether there's a used Astra available, well, then it might be better to do it on the web. I also had another look at a different dimension, which is about time and how people use mobiles to deal with time, or how time affects the use of mobiles. And I think it's quite interesting. Time, there's three ways that people use mobile phones as far as we know. There's time kill, which is I haven't got much to do at the moment. Or there's time shift, which is I've got an opportunity to do this task that needs doing, so I might as well do it at the moment. Like, oh, well, I'll just quickly do my banking now because I've got 5 minutes in the dentist's waiting room. Or there's time or location critical. I have to do this now because I am here, or because this thing, I've just had this message which is critical and I have to respond to it now, and it can't wait until this evening, I have to do it now. So those three kinds of time and use of time I think are quite interesting. So I thought, well, what if I plot those together? And I got this chart, yeah? So how often do people use it? Often or rarely? The thing, and are they trying to kill time or shift time, or is it a time critical thing? And what did I see? Well, I saw all of those apps that we saw on the blue part of the donut earlier bubbling to the top, and all of these web-based things kind of bubbling to the bottom. Rarely. If I read news or blogs less frequently, and if I'm doing random research about a thing or getting the address of a restaurant, these things are rarely used. I might do them in any of these different situations, but they're rarely used. But then there's also these little guys who are causing confusion down there. Yeah? So why would I have a game app on my phone if I use it rarely? Well, we've kind of talked about it. And why would I have a banking app on my phone if I use mobile banking rarely, like I do? And the answer is, well, because you can't have those as mobile, as web-based things. You want game, you need tight OS integration to get good 3D graphics, and you want banking, you need tight integration to get good security, as NetBank will tell you. So, what? Is there something I don't know? So these guys are kind of bobbing down here, and they're kind of distorting the picture, because we can't say, okay, all the purples are at the top, all the greens are at the bottom, we're sorted. Boss who wants an iPhone app, if you're not one of those, then go down here. Because he's like, well, I don't use my banking app much, but it's still an app. It's like, yeah, but I might need it, and when I do, it has to be OS integrated. There's no alternative for it being OS integrated. So, responsive design makes lots of sense for all kinds of infrequently used content. And for responsive design, you might say HTML5 app, in fact. I'm being fairly loose with my terminology in that space. In other words, there's nothing wrong with being part of the 31 minutes a day that the Americans are spending on the mobile web instead of being part of the apps. It's like, well, they're still spending 31 minutes a day, and they're going there for particular reasons, and you need to be there when they go there. And if you go and put yourself in the App Store, you're actually making things worse for yourself, not better. So responsive design or HTML5 apps would make a lot more sense in situations like this. Okay, so the equation and the stuff you're balancing, if you're coming at it from a technical perspective, is there's quite a few factors, and it took me a while to get used to these. So HTML5 or responsive, there should probably be a slash there. Easy to update, yeah? If I make the Financial Times web app, well, I can update it, I can change it tomorrow, and the user's like, oh, cool, it changed. They didn't have to go to an app store, get a download message, any of that stuff. It just changed because it's web. So easy to update, scores high. Low barrier to engagement. I click on a tweet, boom, there's an ft.com story, I'm reading it. Whoopee, I didn't have to download an app to do it. And cross-platform, yeah, I didn't have to write it once for Android and write it again for iPhone. Well, okay, I kind of did a bit, especially when we started getting to BlackBerry, because, you know, the HTML5 support was patchy and inconsistent and all that good stuff. But within the bounds of reasonableness, cross-platform is getting there. But a native app is offering security, and it's offering this ease of monetization, and it's offering this super OS integration that we talked about, and it's offering discovery via an app store, which is a bit of a euphemism, because discovery could equally well be total anonymity via an app store. So the downside of the native app, though, is that you have to do the custom build for multiple platforms, and the user has to make this permanent commitment, even though they just wanted some transient content. So there we go. This is why this equation is flipping complicated, and why when your boss says, says he wants an iPhone app, it's quite hard to say no, because there's all of these kind of factors flying around. Okay, so I just want to talk about responsive design for a while, because if you did decide to go down that route and say, well, yes, actually, I'm going to take my Thorpe Motor website and I'm going to make sure that it works on mobile, then, well, what are you up against? So you're up against the fact that there's all of these formats. There's different resolutions, different sizes in inches, different aspect ratios. There's lots of joyous difficulties, and we're looking at everything from smartphones up to desktop, but actually there's even more than that. There's the dreaded phablet, which just has such a hilarious name that you have to mention it. And there's TVs. Yeah, this actually could end up on a Samsung Smart TV. And then what? And the answer is, actually, it can look a bit wonky if you're not careful. So if we're saying, well, Mr. Boss, who runs the Thorpe Motor Company, perhaps, don't you want to be able to appear on Samsung Smart TVs too? The answer will probably depend on whether he's got a Samsung Smart TV or not. But there's something else going on, which is that mobile context has changed. Yeah? So when we used to make Mobi Web, we used to say, well, it's really only useful for people who are in the time-critical situation, where they're like looking for an address, or they're running for an aeroplane, or they have an urgent need for a piece of data, and so we're going to make Mobi sites that just give you the urgent data, because that's all that people really want. And that was in the days when you had some kind of crappy old black and white Nokia phone with a WAP, and it was just kind of too difficult and too awful to browse the web or to use mobile web stuff. Now, this is not the case, yeah? The context has changed, and people are using their mobile phones to browse the web while they're sitting on their couch a lot of the time. There's a stat which I didn't, amazingly, a stat I didn't get, which is about the proportion of Americans who are using their mobile phone at the same time as watching TV, and it's like really high. Yeah? So there's this idea that I was watching Fringe last night for some reason or other, and they've got #Fringe on the screen all the time now. They just want you to tweet about Fringe the whole time as you watch it. So the context has changed now. It's more like no feature left behind. In the old days, we used to say, well, we'll cull off everything, yeah? We'll only put the real-time critical ones. Now it's like, no, a mobile user could want anything at any time. And in South Africa, there are some people who only have mobile access, and what about them? And all those kind of difficult questions. So now it's no feature left behind, and we use the mobile web, and hooray for the mobile web. It's all clearly perfect, and we should all use it. Well, not quite, because as any of you who've tried it will probably be prepared to attest, responsive design isn't actually quite finished yet. So responsive design is this lovely promise where we go from small phone up to smart TV and everything's glorious, but actually there's still a few problems, and you have to be fairly determined to do it. I put a bit of code in, just a little tiny bit of markup, just because this is so, and you do that kind of thing. Yeah, so images are a real problem, because the way that responsive design works is it says, okay, we've got a style sheet. If we've got media where the screen, the max device width is 480 pixels, then cool, we'll show this style sheet, but we can have another one that says, if the screen width is a different number of pixels, we'll use a different style sheet, and that's really cool. But you can't do that for images. You've just got one tag, image source equals birds.jpg to the end. So that means I have to have one image that can be used sensibly on a little tiny Samsung Pocket, 240 pixels, or on an iPad 3.5, which is like 2,000 and something pixels, so literally 10 times bigger. And that's not terribly convenient. There are ways around it with JavaScript and with using images as the backgrounds of divs and so on, but they all break the whole point of the web. They're not elegant. They don't elegantly exist within the web. They're hacks. So that's one kind of major example where responsive design is definitely struggling. There's this problem in South Africa, yeah, the AK-47 of mobile phones, the Samsung E250, yeah, which is, it's easy to maintain, it's hard to break in the first place, and everyone's got one, much like a Land Rover as well. Is the same idea, and these guys support almost nothing. So if you happen to be working on a project where the kind of people who have these phones need to access your thing, you're in a whole other world of difference and complexity. And one example would be There's a couple of businesses right now making train timetables and when is the next bus and when is the next train accessible to people in Cape Town. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen them, they're pretty cool. But those need to work on this phone, because people with this kind of phone often take buses and trains just as much as people with iPhones might take buses and trains. So that would be a particularly vicious challenge. Then you've got the content challenge, yeah? So if this thought website has got 2,000 pages, that means I've got to go through those 2,000 pages and work out how to change the content on those pages to make it appropriate on mobile. Yeah? Have we got too much copy? Is this waffle? Is the imagery going to work? Have we got big data tables that are all going to need to be munged in some way? So that suddenly turns into this scale job. And then you've got to learn how to do content choreography. Yeah? Content choreography is this idea that, okay, if I show the page at this width, I get 3 columns, and if I squish it down to this width, I get it all stacked up in a row. And these are 4 different common patterns. Mostly Fluid says, well, I only get so wide, and then I stop getting any wider. And this is, the full story where you've got multiple columns and they drop. And then this guy, the layout shifter, is the one where you see the real snazzy stuff like the Microsoft homepage, where all sorts of elements move around and change size and shape. And then this one is the off-canvas one, where the nav bar actually becomes a slide, page slide, and those kinds of things. So you've got to learn about that. Okay, how am I going to make each page actually, the content on each page dance around depending on the device width? And actually, the problem then becomes that you can't really just do that sitting in front of Photoshop. You've got to sit with a developer and do it in HTML, because the detail of, okay, at which point does the design kind of break and we need to put in a radically new one, you kind of only really know when you're sitting there building the page. So it means that designers and front-end coders, front-end developers, need to be sitting pretty much next to each other during at least part of the project, which means that this old diagram of how we do agile and user-centered design together, where we do some design in sprint 1, we build it in sprint 2, and we test it in sprint 3, is kind of even more broken than it was, because actually the design also needs to happen right there when the development is happening at the same time. So new workflows where developers and designers come together in happy bands to perfect pages. This slide seems to be going all over the place. Okay, so interestingly, there's a couple of bits of software I found that's starting to address this. This is easel.io, which is a flipping incredible attempt, yeah? And you can see that as I design in easel.io, which is based on Twitter Bootstrap, I've actually got 3 device sizes that I can just switch between right there and then. So I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, that looks cool. Let's go for pad size. Okay, let's go for big screen. And I can switch between and see my design squishing and moving around. And in fact, this is pretty much writing real CSS and nice clean HTML as I go. So, still a little bit of tuning to get it perfect, but it's pretty cool. The trouble is it's in the cloud, and I don't want to put my work in the cloud, because on the day when CCOM gets cut, my work is gone, so that's a problem. This is Proti, which you get from Prototype with a Y, prototype.com, and this is a plugin for Firefox, and it's trying to do the same thing. It's a little bit simpler, a little bit more basic at the moment, but again, this idea of me being able to switch responsive size, small, medium, large. So in theory, at least, as a designer, I can think about how my design is going to look at 3 sizes as I go, rather than having to draw it big and then have a crisis when I realize that it doesn't work small. Cool. So, are you confused? Because I was. Still am, really. So responsive web apps, yeah? What are we going there or not? Is what I'm interested in, yeah? They're useful, but you don't use them very often, and they don't require special performance, and so nobody's really going to install them as an app. But they're still, so they're out there on the web, like ft.com, I guess. And there was some interesting stuff that came up in slightly various twisted forms, yeah? So HTML5 has got this performance question mark over it, yeah? HTML performance will always lag, because HTML5 isn't going to be integrated with the operating system as fast as the operating system itself is developing. And it was interesting, Facebook had a lot of HTML5 in their app, and they said publicly, we don't think that HTML5 is ready yet, and there was furore when they said it. And 22.7, Simon Dingle from 22.7 actually was doing this presentation with me, or a presentation like this with me a little while ago, he was quite upfront about saying 22.7 tried it due to do a responsive or an HTML5 based app for their thing, and he couldn't get the speed out of it that he needed for the kind of graphics he wanted to do. So, problem. Interesting to note, though, that these guys, Censure, took offense at the whole HTML5 is not ready, and they built Fastbook. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that part of the story, where they said, no, we can get Facebook to be sensational, look just like the Facebook app, and run in a nice WebKit browser. And then they proceeded to explain the hoops of fire that they jumped through in order to make that work. And it wasn't actually broadly compliant HTML5, but it did work like great guns in a browser. So HTML5 isn't quite ready, but it could be. It could be ready, I think. And so if it were to be ready, what would have to happen? Well, the web would have to change a bit. People would have to start getting used to the idea that there's useful things to do out on the web, not just in the App Store. And that change will happen over time, very slowly, as more websites become nicely responsive and people keep having better experiences on the web, on their mobile devices. They might start seeing, okay, this kind of works, and then slowly but surely you can wean them off the App Store to an extent and get them to start using things which are low frequency stuff on the web. So I think that's the way it's going, but it's not there yet. So if your boss says he wants an iPhone app right now, you're still stuck in that same problem. You can't say, no, we can do all this responsively. There's still an equation, cost, benefit, complexity, discoverability, maintainability, cross-platform, all of those factors to weigh up. And it'll vary from business to business. So in other words, it depends. But e-commerce is leading the way in this space. 50% of all online sales from month to day came from mobile devices, says Google. So I think we're going to a place where not everything has to be an app all the time, but it's going to be slow to get there. Cool. Part 2, with apps, the trunk test does not apply. I hope you're having fun. So what does this mean? This is very different. Yeah? So this is about when you're designing an app, what principles can you live by? What is there? What's it like designing an app, and how can you make it so that your app has some kind of elegance to it without getting bogged down in hectic details? And the answer is, well, guess what? It's hard. But let's talk about the trunk test. So Steve Krug is very famous. He's the guy who wrote Don't Make Me Think, which is thin and fun to read. So if you haven't read it, then do, because it's a good laugh and it teaches you a lot about usability. And he invented the trunk test, where he says if you were locked in the trunk, by which he means the boot, of a car and dropped off at a random web page, you should be able to tell where you are, because all pages should have a site ID, a page name, sections and subsections, local navigation, UR here indicators, and maybe search. Well, isn't that marvelous? Problem is, if you're designing a mobile app and you try to put all of those terribly important ingredients into it, you're going to end up with so much clutter, because you've only got this many pixels. You're going to end up with so much clutter that the thing will be kind of a bit desperate, yeah? And who would be foolish enough to try and do that? I mean, really, to try and put all of that stuff into a mobile app, that would be ridiculous. So the story behind this is intriguing, and I don't understand all of it, but the basic idea was there's some guys who made a flippin' fantastic security framework, and it wrapped everything in a thick blanket of security, but unfortunately it was the everything that became the problem, not the security. So when I go into my Nedbank app, the first thing it says is, here's a whole load of stuff you can do, as opposed to saying, Nedbank, certainly here's your balance. Yeah? So rather than, if I'm firing up my Nedbank app 99 times out of 100, it's because I want to see balances and do transactions. And they're like, oh, see balances and do transactions? No, you could apply now, or look at the calculator, or do some Forex. Yes, or read the terms and conditions, don't rush into this balance thing. There's more to Nedbank, which is not really putting my needs first. And then I go into the bit where they will actually show me how much money I've got and let me do transactions. And they've got a problem with the furniture here, where they're saying, you're still in Nedbank. It's very important for you to understand this is Nedbank. And we're going to keep our brand with you all the time, because we don't want you to forget for a moment that this is Nedbank. And of course, if you wanted to get to that place where you check the terms and conditions, you can always do that as well, so don't worry. And what that means on an iPhone is that we're now left with a situation where we don't have enough space to put standard iPhone buttons on, like a proper back button, because now this is kind of no longer fat finger size. This is weenie, and I have to kind of peck at it with my fingertip rather than press it properly. So because of their obsession with making sure they know that I am in Nedbank and that I can read the terms and conditions at any time, they've actually made the tasks I want to do that much harder. And then we've got a nav bar which is reasonably Appleian standard, and it's in the right place for Apple, and Google would disapprove, and that's all good. And then we've got an extra thing which is help and log off. So we've used up yet more of the real estate with Chrome. In fact, we've got this much Chrome on the screen and only this much content, which isn't really the way a good app feels. And then I can get right down into it, and I can end up in situations where it just gets a bit random, to be frank. And I'm with this screen, for example, I can go back, or I can go back to the menu, or I can go back to the payments menu. At this point, you're pretty certain that they want you to go back, but you're not quite sure. And then, last of all, here, when I get right down to it, this app that I so lovingly downloaded from the App Store from Apple onto my Apple product isn't using Apple design patterns, standards, interface widgets at all. Yeah, this is kind of some webby thing which has gone a bit funny. This is a drop-down menu and it's sort of indented, and this is not really like Apple at all. And I've got all of this Chrome, and it's just not right. It's just not right. So the trunk test, yeah, I need all of this navigational Chrome to tell me where I am. This does not apply. In fact, what seems to be happening is that app greatness seems to be inversely proportional to clutter. Yeah. So if you haven't got this yet, then maybe you should take a look. It's rather expensive, but it's terribly good. Yeah. So it's the world's simplest to-do list maker, and this is the only to-do list I have ever used successfully, because it doesn't ask you when the thing is due by, what priority it is, what category it is, whether you need to assign it to Bob or any of those things. It's just like, oh, you want to make a list, okay. And you can create a new item by just pulling down on the list and a new one pops in at the top, or you can make one in the middle by just pinching apart to make one there, and you can drag them up and down and so on. And you navigate by swishing up and down in the whole thing. And there is, as you may have noticed, no Chrome at all. There's no Nedbank bar or clear bar, there's no back button, there's absolutely nothing except my to-do list in bright, jolly colours. It also makes really good sounds. So if you cross off lots of things, it goes pa-ching, 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 twinkle. It's very nice. Makes you feel really good about it. So I guess they should be paying me commission, but they're not. And then another one that's been very popular recently, Rise. Yeah, so you want to set when your alarm will be. You just move your finger up and down over this, and as you move your finger later, then the sky becomes blue, and as you move your finger earlier, then it's more like dawn, and there we go. And then if I want to turn it on, I just do a kind of a swish, and then it's on, and then this tells me how long I've got left to sleep, and there is no Chrome anywhere here again, which is curious, isn't it? And then iPad App of the Year 2012 is Paper, which, if you haven't tried that, I strongly recommend. It's absolutely gobsmackingly brilliant. You've got as many customized Moleskines as you want, and you can make more of them, and then you can swoosh your Moleskine open, and then you've got the world's best painting tools here. They're unlike any painting tools I've ever used. They can make, anybody, it doesn't matter how ham-fisted you are, suddenly your stuff starts looking really cool. And again, there's no Chrome here in the traditional sense. Okay, we've got a bit of Chrome here, I guess. We've got kind of a tool palette. But here, there's no kind of traditional Chrome at all. So these are the winning apps. These are the apps that are getting mentioned and noticed and making people gasp and so on. And they're not... Oh, we have a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. The to-do list.
Yeah.
Was that created by a South African from Cape Town?
I flipping hope so, but I don't think it was.
Because someone showed it to me 2 years ago and told me this is what they were going to make.
Oh.
And it was a South African in Cape Town. I can't remember her name.
Well, if you ever do introduce me. It's made by, is it Real Mac Apps? Something like that. And I don't think they're Cape Townian. I think they're American, but maybe they just did a good impression of being American and they fooled me, so I'm not sure. Okay, so Krug's signposting, why is it there? When Steve Krug says you need all of this trunk test stuff, why does he say you need that? Well, maybe one of the reasons is because if you get interrupted, then you need to be able to resume, yeah? Because as humans, we've got terrible short-term memories, in fact. Our attention is in very short supply, and if something goes bang, or a child spills a thing, or a boss shouts something, you can be like focused on that, and you come back to what you were doing, and you're like, where was I again? And then you need that furniture to tell you. So mobile is supposed to be a high interrupt environment. You know, I'm out and about in the street, something could go bang, or a child could spill something at a moment's notice. So surely I need all this stuff to make me focus on the mobile device and help me remember where it was that I got to when I come back to it. But oddly, as I've been designing apps, and when we look at some of the examples I gave you, the more you take out, the more people seem to like them. So none of this crow, none of this fuss. So I'm quite bamboozled by that. And I had a chat actually with my colleague Rianne, and we kind of batted around some ideas, and this was the best we could come up with, which is that it seems that people are liking apps that do almost nothing, have very limited function, and do a very simple thing in a really simple way. So there's no way to get lost in them because they hardly do anything. They just do one thing with absolute elegance. Yes?
The thought I've had on that is that people are thinking of the whole mobile device as being the application.
Mm.
You go back to the PC world, you have this feature bloat that kind of came on and on. You know, you buy your software product, whatever you like, and over the years, they put more and more features on to do all these million things. Whereas with mobile devices, it's like, well, I want to do that thing. It's no longer like it's like a best of breed approach rather than a.
Well, your app is a feature, is what you're saying.
Your app is a feature.
The phone is
of the whole phone,
yeah.
because the phone is your application.
So I want the feature to be really, really minimal. Nicely put. Okay, less on each screen. Well, actually, as you take stuff off the screens, people seem to be able to remember where they are better because there's less stuff for them to remember. And then another interesting one was actually your phone distracts you less than your PC. Because in your PC, you know, you've got a window, and then there's another window behind it, and there's another window over here. And at any minute, you could quickly, you know, Microsoft Word could catch your eye, or Excel could catch your eye, or whatever it is. And the PC has got more stuff there to distract you, which is a theory. And I think, and the last one is actually when people are using their mobile devices, they're actually concentrating insanely hard. And I mean, we've probably all seen it, yeah? There's that thing where you're in a meeting and everybody's quite bored, and there's somebody kind of doing that, and then the meeting says, so what do you think, Bob? And he goes, yeah, yes, I agree, yes. And he hadn't the faintest idea what was happening in the meeting, even though he was physically sitting right there. In fact, all of his attention had gone to that mobile device, all of the limited attention we got. So in a funny sort of way, we actually focus really hard on mobile devices, and we really tune in on them, perhaps more than we do on big screen PCs. Who knows? It's kind of interesting stuff. So those are some theories, and of course, even when the app is not ultra simple, when it's actually a monolithic app like Facebook, there's still some things which they're doing which I think are quite elegant. So when I first saw this, I thought they'd got this wrong, but I now think they've got this right, yeah? Which is, if I'm in Facebook and I press the hamburger, this three-stripe icon which we all know and love is now called the hamburger. If I press the hamburger, then out comes this nav bar which can teleport me to radically different places, to newsfeed or events or friends or all sorts of different places. So that's a major navigational option. But if I drill into a posting on my timeline, it's gone. The hamburger is no longer there because I shouldn't be thinking about teleporting somewhere else. I should be focusing on what I've got. So they've given me a back button, which is nice and standard, and they've said, okay, we're not going to try and take you elsewhere. We're going to try and give you navigation that is about what you're doing right now. This, of course, is your notifications, and they kind of have to do that. But the fact that the hamburger disappears, at first I thought, well, that's bad. The hamburger's disappeared. And now I'm like, oh yeah, the hamburger's disappeared. Of course it has. That's the point. Yeah. And you can actually edge swipe if you need to get it back. So great. Now, here's another thing bosses say. Actually, I'm going to go back. Here's another thing bosses say. You say, so if we're going to make an app, it's going to be this long, it's going to take this long and be this hard. And then the boss says, why? It's only this big. It's like a tiny thing. Is it going to take you that long? It's like, look at this. I could put it in my pocket. How's it going to take that long? Yeah? And that's quite mysterious. So why does it take so long? I think I have some quite good answers to that. So here's one of my favorite cartoons. You've probably seen me show it to you before a million times. Typical Apple product, touch. Typical Google product, find. Your company's app. Ah! Loads and loads of stuff and cruft. Why does it happen? Well, I think it happens because as you're designing a product, as you're coming up with a product, the complexity starts to climb. Stakeholders weigh in with additional requirements, and suddenly you realize it simply must do this, and oh my God, it could do that, and oh, that would be brilliant, we've got to put that in. And before you know it, the complexity of the thing has gone sky high as the design time has gone forward. So inexperienced teams say, wow, this thing's complicated, we better launch before it gets any worse. And experienced teams say, hang on, I know what happens, we need to keep going. This thing is too complex as it stands, we have to work on it harder. At some point, what happens is the whole thing breaks, and you end up with something much, much simpler. I often say it's like the game of Buckaroo, which I had as a kid, a spring-loaded donkey. Everybody takes turns to put on another piece of equipment onto the donkey's back, and at some point the donkey kicks it all off. And this is kind of what happens when you're designing a mobile app. You add features, and at some point the whole framework breaks and the app can't hold it all anymore, and you're like, this is wrong. And then what tends to happen is the whole thing falls apart, and you realize that actually all you really needed was just this. Yeah? You just go that a little bit further. In fact, then you're playing Jenga. Yeah, I can still get to the same height, but I can take a large number of the blocks out. And I thought, wow, I'm clever having worked all this out. You know, I was pretty proud of myself. Until somebody pointed out that actually this was voiced by a dude about 100 years ago, at least, called Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. I don't know if you can see his splendid moustache. Absolutely first rate. And he said, I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my right arm for the simplicity that lies on the other side of complexity. Yeah? So I think a lot of people know this in this room. Yeah? It's the idea that you can make a simple app which does nothing. Maybe it just shows a purple screen. That would be really simple and totally useless. Or we can make a simple app that does something amazing really well, but to get there we've got to go over the complexity curve. A great way to go over the complexity curve is iterative design. Yeah? The idea that the first thing you draw will be wrong, and when you keep drawing it long enough and getting feedback from users, then you will start to see the light and you will start to get to a really good product. And who's doing that? Well, Path, for example. It's very interesting. Dave Morin, who's the CEO or something or other of Path, said true simplicity takes a lot of time. In mobile, that's especially true. 20 iterations to get the home view right. 20 iterations. And, you know, and by iteration 2, the boss is tapping his fingers. How did they do it? Well, they did a mixture of quantitative data and extensive ethnographic observations, which means they watched people using stuff a lot to try and work out how to make Path good. So that's what it means to climb the complexity curve, and it's quite a daunting task, but not many people have made apps as good as Path, and that's what they had to do to achieve it. If you're going to do that, you're going to do iterative prototyping, then there's quite a lot of tools that can help you, especially on iPhone. There's this one which is mostly free, and it's kind of cool, eh? It's a bit of a hack, but it's kind of cool. It's called TAP, Touch Application Prototypes. You bash something together in Fireworks, which is the not-so-free part, and then you use their PHP scripts and some magic and a server and a twinkling and a sparkling, and it appears on your iPhone, and you can actually, it's got really great transitions, and you can do surprisingly good stuff with it to make mock-ups that make people think twice before they realize it's actually a mock-up. And now there's people who package this idea up, fieldtestapp.com, they let you do it all in the cloud. Fluid UI let you do it all in the cloud, and they also allow it to make it work on Android, which is quite useful. There's Hype, there's Axio 6.5, which is different, and then you could go crazy and do it in PhoneGap if HTML is your thing. So, 2 more thoughts. One is stroke, don't poke. There's something going on there. Yeah? So if you, when we do research and look at how people are using the apps that we're working on and so on, we see that when you put a swipe in, people love it. Yeah. We, for example, on Mixit, on the Android one, Mixit 6.3, if you wanted to switch between the major screens, you pressed on the tab, and then Mixit 6.4, you could swipe between the major screens. And whenever you put that in front of somebody, they go, ooh. And they just kind of do that for a while. Ooh. So why is it that people like the stroke more than the poke? It's kind of interesting, because I think the answer is because it's more human. If you think about us in nature and us in the world, we don't often do this. Yeah, it's not actually often that you really do this. You do this if there's somebody who's in trouble, or if there's a dead jellyfish on the beach and you're trying to like but you don't actually do this very much. Whereas you do this and you know, all of this kind of stuff all the time. So probably the whole swipey thing is linked to, you know, magazines and gestures and so on, and it's also linked to the fact that as humans, that's kind of what we're designed to do, which is why we feel happy when we do it. So that's a thought. But of course, the trouble with gestures is that they're really hard to discover. They're a joy to perform, but there's nothing in the interface to tell you that you should do a gesture. And so, you know, this was the price that Clear had to pay. There's no Chrome. So when you start up Clear, there is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-point tutorial stuck onto the front of the app with big visuals showing how it's done, to teach you the idea. You know, there are 3 navigation levels, and pinch vertically shut to collapse your current level and navigate up. It seems to be the price you pay if you want low chrome, nice stroke don't poke type of apps. Is there an alternative? Well, I don't know of one really yet, but it's interesting to note if you downloaded the Gmail app for iPhone, they did a really nice what's new. When you download a major version, the first thing that happens is they give you 4 or 5 screens of what's new. And they've done it in such a delightful way, and it's so kind of jolly and fun and easy and simple and pretty that you're like, cool, my new app, yeah, what is new? And you kind of zoom through and you're like, oh, okay, cool, I get it now, thanks. And you're done. So I think provided the app works in a coherent way, and it's easy to remember what you've been taught in the tutorial, because 7 screens you can forget pretty fast. Provided it works in a coherent way and you can remember it, maybe a tutorial isn't all bad. It's like, this is how your new toy works. Who knows? Cool. So now I hope you're as confused as I am. What do we conclude from all this? Make sure your next website is responsive. Why would you not? Okay? Don't make websites into apps when they're used infrequently and won't benefit from OS integration. And I need you to go and see when responsive apps make sense and report back, because we don't know yet. That's where we're going. And if you're designing an app, then make sure that the app does as little as possible, because it's a feature in the larger operating system. And then remove as much of the Chrome as you can, and then user test it and realize that you can remove even more. I hope that helps. Here's something else that will help. This is a plug for a free service, Nomad Device Lab. If you're building apps and you want to test them on a whole shed load of different phones, or if you're building responsive websites and you want to, then devicelab.coza they hold fairly frequent open days where you can just come and use the collection of mobile devices that they have entirely free of charge, just for the love of it, to test your thing and see how well it works on a whole heap of different devices. So that's nice, isn't it? That's it. That's all I got for you.